Hey guys, welcome to the latest episode of Beyond the Tape, a podcast where we chat with people behind the scenes in the mountain bike industry, specifically Australia, whether they're media, riders, or people behind the scenes at distributors or even service companies, and of course everyone else between. This episode is brought to you by Tailored Trails. They're Tassie specialist when it comes to, just all-inclusive trail tours in Tasmania. They include Turby, Maydena, St. Helens, the West Coast. I can't wait to get down there and do one of these things. With up to 18 people, custom shuttle trailers and racks, there's nothing you have to do. So forget the hassle of your next Tassie trip and let Tailored Trails take care of all the logistics and planted. And don't forget they're rider owned and operated, so they know all the rad trails and everything that's happening down there. FE Sports are another sponsor of the podcast. They're the leading industry experts in sporting product imports, distribution, wholesale, and customer service in Australia, as well as New Zealand. They're the official distributors for brands such as 100%, Pirelli, Wahoo, Aftershocks, and way more. I've been loving the Pirelli tyres. You would have seen them on my bike. And as this episode goes out, we're also running a bit of a competition with 100%. So jump over to Instagram, comment a couple of dudes that you think need some new sunnies, and we're giving away a pair of sunnies from those guys. So make sure you jump over, follow all the instructions, and go on the chance to win some sunnies. NS Dynamics are a premier suspension service centre in Australia. They're based up in Queensland. Even though they're so far away from me, it usually only takes me about a week to get my stuff back. If Ozpost was faster, it would probably be less. The 24 turnaround is amazing and their quality is never shit. They've made all my suspension feel better. So I'll be sending my rear shock up to those guys for a 4-sprung tractive tune as soon as I finish paying my bills. Frank Mountain Bike Apparel, they make some of the best apparel in the country. I have recently axed myself at 32k an hour, slid on my ass for probably 10 meters or so. Nothing major, but man, most other brands, including one 3-letter brand that is massive in most motorbike companies and mountain bike companies, would have been destroyed. I know this because I've tested it. Whereas these pants, sure, they had a hole in them, but man, it could have been so much worse. Anyway, those guys are amazing and they're killing it. So if you want a custom jersey or some rad pants, hit them up. 2Up Bike Co. These guys are the importers of Noble wheels, Factor components, and Dumont lubricants. I've just recently got a Shimano saddle from these guys. It's a downhill saddle, so it's nice and short. The rounded sides stop my inside thighs getting bruised, and man, this thing is comfortable. No bibs necessary. Loving it. Dirt Surfer mud guards keep all the mud out of my eyes. Crush Oz keeps all the mud off my bike. And Fist, man, they just keep me punching on. I just got some of their new Chapter 6 gloves and love the colours, man. They just make you stand out a little bit more, and the grip is phenomenal. Anyway, we'll move on to today's guest. Today's guest is Muffin, a.k.a. Ryan De La Rue. He is a racer, raced downhill. He's been riding bikes since he was a kid, even stood on an EWS podium at one point. But then a chance meeting with one of Australia's godfathers of mountain biking saw him kind of change his life. His life kind of took a different direction. So we chat about a bit of everything. It's pretty interesting, and I hope I did this guy justice because he's kind of mountain bike royalty in my eyes. He's one of the guys pushing the sport. Anyway, as usual, grab beer, grab water, grab wine, and enjoy the episode.
I'm easy. See how we go. Hopefully I don't ramble on too much.
I'll ramble on as much as you want. That's what people are here for.
All good.
Well, Ryan De La Rue, a.k.a. Muffin, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, mate. Long time listener, so it's
sick.
Cool to get the invite.
Where did the nickname Muffin come from? I think I've heard this before, but I can't remember where.
Yeah, so early on when I was getting into riding and meeting people in the scene, I fortunately bumped into Glen Jacobs one day down at Forest, and a couple of chance encounters with him in my late teens, and I finished school, started my apprenticeship as a chef, and I used to go in my break between like lunch shift and dinner shift. I'd go down to Anglesea. It was about a 45-minute drive away, and I'd meet up with Glenn and a few of the OG World Trail guys when they just started, and we would ride this four-cross track. And one day he was just like, "Oh yeah, you're a chef, bring some snacks down. That'll be cool." And it got to the end of the day, and I'd sort of forgotten about it. And I was just about to jump in the car, and I remembered. So I thought, "Shit, what have I made today?" And there was some leftover muffins. So I threw them in there, showed up with some muffins, and he took a bite, and he was like, "Holy shit, these are the best muffins I've ever had. You're the muffin boy." And it just so happened, like, I was sort of getting into downhill racing then, and everyone he introduced me to, he was like, "Yeah, this is Muffin," and it just sort of flowed on from that. So uh, even when I went over to Canada, in my early 20s, one of my good mates over there just knew me as Muffin. So that anyone he introduced me to, it just flowed on. And yeah, I worked in a kitchen over there for about a year, and people didn't even know my name was Ryan. They just knew me as Muffin, and it stuck. One of those things you definitely you don't pick them, but they stick.
Well, I mean, like, you can't ask for anyone better to get a nickname from, really. Like Glen Jacobs, the
Yeah,
godfather of
definitely.
mountain
And I
biking.
guess as random as the name Muffin is, I guess it sort of stood out. Maybe that was a good thing early on when I was getting into racing downhill. Instead of me being just known as it's another Ryan, it's Muffin kind of stood out a bit. Maybe that helped. So I don't know.
I mean, De La Rue rolls off the tongue, so it's not the worst, but yeah, for sure. When
Yeah.
did when did you kind of get into mountain biking? When did it all start?
I grew up riding bikes, and that was, I think, just that era of childhood. Like, you rode to school, you rode home from school, you screwed around until it was dark on your bike, and always built jumps and stuff like that. But when I was probably 15, there was like an end of year school program where instead of going to school for the last week, they had all these random activities, and one of them was mountain biking. My brother had just like a Kmart hardtail full rigid mountain bike, because growing up I always just rode a BMX, and I think I borrowed that, and the teachers drove us to the top of this gravel road that was mostly descending, and we rode down, and that was our mountain biking day. And I just got hooked after that. And I think I knew one other guy where I grew up in Colac who was a bit older, and he was kind of into mountain biking as well. So um, that was probably the initial influence. And then I spent that whole summer holidays. I went and lived with my uncle and auntie who had just had their first child down in Melbourne. And I just like did
Mm.
whatever I could. I worked for their business. I did babysitting, like whatever I could to scrounge up money, and managed to get $1,000 together and bought my first mountain bike, which was this Haro sort of hardtail, sort of that downhill free ride style, early 2000s with yeah, just like very basic components, but
Yeah.
it just like blew my mind. That was my first bike that had forks and you know disc brakes. Even though they were cable, I still thought they were the coolest things in the world, and chunky tires and stuff. So when I showed up after that school holidays or the Christmas break back, like amongst my mates, everyone was like, "What the hell is this thing?" There was just like
Yeah.
nothing really going on where I grew up where people were into it. So yeah, that's how it all sort of began, I guess.
Was that one of those, like, I can't even remember what they were called, like the X1 or something like that, and they had like the big bulky monocog top tube, and they just looked
Yeah, it
real
was
tough.
definitely like that. It looked really tough, and even I think it had like these cheap SR Suntour forks on it, and I hit a tree once riding downhill, and they like bent backwards, so it was just super deep head angle. But yeah, the frame was fine. It was definitely built tough, that thing.
Well, like, so obviously there wasn't much like going on in the mountain bike world in Kulak. Like, how'd you kind of get around to races and get into the sport as such?
Yeah, I guess initially I mountain biking starting out, I was just finding whatever I could to ride, whether it was like a 50-meter hill that had a bit of gradient, or we were building these crappy little dirt jumps. And that's actually how I bumped into Glenn randomly when he went out to Forest for the first time to have a look at that as a trail network. And then we randomly bumped into him later that day at the service station in town. I think we were getting some Red Bulls or something, as you do before you go
Yeah.
down and jumps. And we're like, "Oh, you should come and check out our sweet jumps." Looking back now, they were just tiny piles of dirt.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, so Glenn and Dylan, the directors of World Trail, and that was very early days for them. They came down and hung out and checked it out. And I think that sort of inspired me because I didn't know who Glenn was. But after that chance encounter, I sort of looked in my magazines at home and I was like, oh, wow, this guy's like, he's the man. He's legit. He's done it all. And it was when Chosen Lion had just been filmed. So I think I was just influenced by anything I could get my hands on, whether it be magazines or DVDs or videos, even probably back then, like tail end videos. And like one of my mates from school would download, what was it, Drop In from Canada, like that TV series.
Yeah, that was sick. Yep.
That was like, in my mind, that was what I wanted to try and be able to ride with stuff like that. And then just randomly, again, bumped into a guy who has some trails down at Apollo Bay, Mike Kidd. And yeah, early 2000s, he was doing heaps down there. He had heaps of tracks on his property and he'd do shuttle days and stuff. So I just got to go in there on weekends and just met people through that. And then it was like, oh yeah, there's a race we're going to. Do you want to jump in? And went to my first downhill race at the Yangs, and I must have been about 18. Got there on a Sunday morning. Did one practice run. Didn't even really know about qualifying and stuff like that. Missed the shuttle. I had to pedal my big heavy downhill bike up the hill.
Good.
And came dead last in qualifying. So that was my first introduction to racing, but it didn't deter me. And not long after that, I think I got to some of the King of Ballarat winter races, which was super short, but that was like a really cool intro for me. And I started to find a bit of pace, I guess, or feel like I was getting better and could be a little bit competitive. And I just got hooked. I just wanted to get better. I wanted to get faster. And everything was like about mountain biking, working was just to fund the next bike and stuff like that. So
it kind of takes over your life pretty quickly, doesn't it? Like you go from being that kid at the servo to being deep in it pretty quickly. Like
definitely, yeah. And it was just like, everything. You wanted to buy a new set of grips or a new set of pedals or like a new Marzocchi hat or something like that, or yes. A Troy Lee t-shirt. Just had to get the gear, so it felt like you were a mountain biker.
It's Marzocchi stickers everywhere, and I mean, like, it kind of is a testament to the mountain biking, that what you just said with, like, it doesn't matter who people are. Like, it's Glen Jacobs, as I said, the Godfather, but they all just draw people into the sport, and it's crazy to see that story is kind of mirrored with so many people in the industry. Is that kind of
for sure
what drew you in as well, like meeting those people?
Yeah, like not only meeting Glenn, but I just feel like everyone I met through mountain biking, it didn't matter if they were 10 years older than me or 5 years younger, like you were just on this common playing ground, like, you had this common interest and you were just stoked, and everything was about like, oh, we're going riding here, do you want to come? Or we're going to go to this race, jump in with us. And that's something that I've found has been really cool. Even once I got into trail building as well, you meet so many different people with different backgrounds, but they're all passionate about building trails. So it brings everyone together. And I don't think there's many other jobs where you can live and work together and get on pretty well.
Yeah,
it's kind of an interesting industry in that way.
Just a bunch of mates trying to make a little bit of money, really. Like, that's the way I kind of look at it.
Yeah, definitely. For sure.
How did your racing kind of progress from there? Like you started, I guess, what would be considered late now if you were starting around 18. Like,
yeah, for sure. I remember like seeing in magazines, and I think early on, everyone was just drawn to racing a World Cup one day, and that was definitely a goal. But I think once I realised that I was no good, I was running out of time in under 19s, and I was no good at that point. I just wanted to sort of keep progressing, and I think I've always been pretty driven to feel like I can better myself, or I've never feel like I've got as fast as I could get and stuff like that. So I just always tried to keep pushing on and did Vic races and some national races. And then I think I'd finished my chef's apprenticeship and I was still living in Colac, and I got another job in this new restaurant that was opening up. And they were keen for me to work for them. So I was like, I'll just try and barter with them a bit and say, if you give me all these weekends off over summer so I can go to every state race and every national race, like, I'll come and work for you. And they reluctantly agreed to that. So
Yeah.
I managed to, probably like maybe 2008, I think I raced the expert class and did pretty well in the state and nationals. Like, I was competitive in that, had some podiums and stuff like that. So that gave me the motivation to be like, all right, let's keep pushing. And I'm not sure if you remember tech and suspension that was started up around 2009. So I was another young guy who grew up near where I was living in Colac, Aidan Weiber. I'm not sure if you recall that name, but he was around the same time that Troy was coming through the juniors, and he was just insane on a bike, like that, had that natural talent, could just stuff around and still kick ass. And he was racing really well. And I think initially he got a bit of interest for sponsorship and stuff like that. And because I was always beside him at races and taking him to races and stuff, I kind of scored a bit of a deal as well. So Ken hooked me up with suspension and helped me out with a bit of support. And that was just before I went over to Canada in 2009. And I did crankworks and stuff like that. And that's sort of where I really got a lot of time on the bike and felt like that's where I progressed a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I think anytime someone comes back from spending a year in Canada, it's like they've just done 10 years more of riding and they've just managed to get all these skills.
Yeah, you like figure out how to whip and scrub and stuff.
Yeah, because they have jumps everywhere. What is it? I think A-Line's got something like 75 jumps now, something like that, something crazy on one trail.
Yeah, I hate to know how many laps I did on that in those years when I was there. Like, that was just the go-to.
And what was the Australian scene like then? Like, 2008 that was kind of Sam Hill's beginning / premium period. So I guess what was
definitely. The Aussie World Cup guys were killing it. Even like the junior guys like Will Rishbith and Button and stuff like that. Like, they were guys that I aspired to be, like, and try and follow in their footsteps, I guess. But definitely, like, Carver was still racing, and Sam Hill was a bit of an idol, and had some random meetings with him over the years, which was super cool. And racing was huge. Even like the Vic state races, the downhill back then was massive. Like, there'd be at least 300 people, I reckon, at every race, and even nationals seemed the same. The fields just seemed a bit deeper. There were more people just going because maybe back then as well, there wasn't as much access to trails. That was kind of like, from what I recall anyway, that was like the beginning of these trail destinations being built, and like the trail industry in Australia starting to take off. So racing was kind of like, if you wanted to go and do runs, like, a race was on, so you would go and do that. Whereas now I feel like with trail bikes, it's a lot more of a social scene. I even noticed that.
That's a huge point. Yeah. I've never even thought of it.
Yeah, I even noticed that with sorry, there's a bit of a lag. I feel like I'm cutting you off.
That's all right. It's good. I'll fix it in post. It's fun.
I feel like even with enduro races, they sort of spiked and they had those huge numbers, but you could have a state race in southeast Queensland and you'd get 350 riders, and then you'd have a national at the same venue and it might only be 150 or 200. It was like, for whatever reason, like the national races had a bit of a, I don't know, something weird where people would be like, oh, that's a national, I'm not going to go to that. And they just seemed to get smaller and smaller, which was a shame.
I think anytime you put national or state championships in front of a track name, like, that track just gets more difficult. It's just like this weird phenomena, because we have the same thing down here. Like, you have 200 people at a downhill race, but if nationals comes up, it drops to 150. Like, it's this weird kind of concept. Like even for me, I'm trying to go to nationals next year. I'm not going to win. I'm not going to do well. I'm going to do probably terrible, but it's just a fun event to go and be a part of as a racer.
Yeah. And that's what I loved about the downhill racing. It wasn't just about race day. I was definitely focused on that, but there was just so many good memories of like hanging out and camping at the race and yeah, just riding your bike. And that was the coolest thing, and just meeting new people. So, yeah, I think if anyone is like hesitant to get into racing, I would just say jump in and go for it. And hopefully there's a few more races coming up now if things go a little bit more back to normal. But yeah, racing was definitely a huge learning curve for me. And also just I met the majority of the people that I know now, like through racing back then.
Oh, for sure. It's like such a big industry and such a big group and community. Like the amount of people you can meet is so different to the people you'd meet in just general life. Like it's a weird, and it goes back to you saying like everyone rides for the same reason, even though they're from different backgrounds. And you have that common ground. It's such a good sport.
Yeah, definitely.
What I guess like every Australian rider seems to go to Canada and go to Whistler. Like what was your main draw there? Was it just to go and experience those trails or?
Yeah, it just felt like, some of the guys I met through the Vic Downhill series were like, yeah, we're going over this year. And it just seemed like that natural progression of like you do racing in Australia and like Whistler is that place to get to. And yeah, I just saved up and had, I think, $5,000 or something. And I was like, this should last me 6 weeks, and went over in 2009 for the first time. And it was just like you die and go to heaven when you get there. You just can't believe that a place like that exists. And then, yeah, even Crankworks and stuff like that, just to see that many people who aren't even, it's not even just mountain bikers there. The whole village is packed out and people left over from winter. And yeah, it was just heaven over there. And I just got hooked and I wanted to just keep going back every year.
What did you compete in any events and stuff at Crankworks? Like, you kind of do that?
Yeah, I think the first year I went over was I did the Air DH, the Garbanzo DH, and then the Canadian Open. And I'm pretty sure that may have been the first year that Canadian Open, like the Heckler Rock and stuff.
Oh, sick. Yeah.
That line was cut in fresh. And that was just a massive eye opener. Like every time riding that track in practice, I was just shitting myself and holding on for dear life. And I've never experienced a feeling like sitting in that start gate for Canadian Open and you can just hear this roar and like this wave of noise come in. And yeah, it was massive. I think I did it a couple of years and then it got a bit wild. And I ended up being up there as a spectator one year and just being like, how is this even possible that there's this? But I think maybe Canadian Open, I might have been like in the 50s or 60s, and the Garbo might have been around the same. But then I actually had a pretty solid race in the ADH, and I got maybe like a top 30 or something. And I was like looking back through the results sheet, I was probably like the least known Aussie rider. There was like Bryn and people like that, Cody Eichhorn or something. And then I was like the next Aussie on the list who I found that pretty motivating for me to be like, yeah, all right, like I just got to keep pushing and try and go faster.
Yeah, I'm kind of sad that Heckler's Rock is gone. It's the one thing I never got to experience and the one thing I really wanted to experience. I'd be happy not to ride in Whistler and just go and experience Heckler's Rock. Like, it's so famous. Yeah. It's so good.
It's such a crazy thing, and how something like that could just sort of spawn from nothing one year and then escalate as much as it did. It's pretty epic. It goes to show how passionate the fans are, I guess. And,
I think it got shut down for good reason too. Like, it was getting a bit wild.
Yeah, 100%.
So how long did you kind of spend over there for that type of year? Was it a year or so?
The first time I went was 2009, and I just did a 6-week holiday. I was was still chefing before I went, and told them I wanted to go on this 6-week holiday after they'd already given me all these weekends off over the
Yep.
busiest time. And they came back and said, look, we'll give you 4 weeks, and you can't have the weekends off next summer to go race. And I was like, all right, well, I think this is the end of my hospitality career. So I pretty much just, quit my job, went over there, didn't really know what I was going to do when I came back. I knew Glen by that point pretty well, and like we hung out a fair bit. They would have been starting Mount Buller like around that time. So he was in Victoria a bit. And so, when I came back from Canada, I think it was either the World Cup or the World Champs in Canberra. So I went up there and just hung out, and then, managed to weasel my way in and get a spot with Glen on the crew. And back then it was pretty different. It was kind of like Glen was on the trail all the time, and there was like maybe a machine operator and 1 or 2 others. So a mate of mine who I met down at Apollo Bay through riding the downhill tracks there, I remember he got a job like 6 months before me with World Trail, and I was so dirty because I was like, damn, like he's taken one of the spots. Like it's going to be so hard to get a job building trails now. And thankfully I got a gig, and I knew nothing about trail building when I started. I dug a lot of trails, but it was just shoveling dirt and hoping that it worked. So I'm very thankful for the opportunity to start building trails with Glen. And at the time, it just felt like a job that was going to be a way that I could fund more bike stuff, more racing. And I knew that he would support me if I needed a Friday off to go to a race. And became really good friends with Reece Atkinson in the early days of World Trail. Like I knew of him before then, but we spent a lot of time together and did plenty of missions on weekends, going to races and driving back through the night and running out of fuel and all sorts of stuff.
That's
just
so good.
be able to race. And we just worked our butts off in the early days. Like we'd never do less than like a 10-hour day on the trail and still go riding afterwards. We were just all about trying to make as much money as we could to be able to fund going to the next race and stuff like that. So after about a year, just under a year with World Trail, I wanted to go over to Canada again for another 6-week holiday. So booked all that in and got over there, and like halfway into the trip, a couple of mates were like, man, we're going to stay for winter. You should stay. And I was like tossing it up, and I was like, oh no, maybe I'll save up more and I'll come back and do it next year. And they're like, oh, like we might not be here next year. Like, let's just do it now. It'll be a sick time. And pretty much one night after drinking a couple of litres of cider with the boys, I got convinced that I should stay. And thankfully, Glenn supported it and called my family, and they were like, yeah, sounds cool. And I went into a snow season with like zero money. I was selling whatever parts I had back home, like a spare set of wheels and an old hardtail XC bike, just so I could try and fund myself into winter. And then got a job over there working as a chef. Well, I was a qualified chef working in a kitchen as like a kitchen hand or something, getting paid $11 an hour. So just learnt how to live off nothing pretty much for the winter, and had a really good time in the winter, actually, like learning how to snowboard and stuff and hanging out. And then that flowed on to the next summer, so the 2011 summer. And that's probably when I felt like I just spent so much time on my downhill bike, just doing so many laps, like day in, day out. I just felt super comfortable on my bike, and was, I guess, living the dream over there. Just ride all day and go and have some beers at night and wake up late and start again the next day.
I think that's every Australian's dream, right? Every Australian mountain bike's dream just wants to go and do that.
Yeah.
Who was the crew that you kind of head over there with? Is there anyone still over there? Like it seems like there's a vortex that keeps some people there.
Yeah, definitely. I think you're familiar with Trevor.
Yeah, I am.
Might have worked with him in Adelaide. Yeah.
Yep.
He was like my best mate. I met him. I knew of him before I went over in 2009, and then I ended up staying with him at staff housing that first summer, and it was just like we were best mates. It was like we'd known each other our whole lives. So we just did everything. Like we just rode all the time, went out partying and stuff, and he was just my best mate over there. So
Yep.
hung out with him the whole time I was in Canada, and the times that he was coming back to Australia too. And even, earlier this year, I was trying to convince him to come back, but I think he's stuck in the Whistler vortex.
He's never coming back, man. We've lost him. We've
Yeah.
lost him. And I think he's tried to
But,
convert so many people to that life as well.
Yeah.
The people I know that he's sucked into over there is amazing.
But I managed to meet, I met a lot of good Canadians, but it seems like you meet more Aussies over there. And yeah, that second summer I was there, I became really good friends with Evan Winton as well, who I've now gone into business with. So yeah, we just spent that whole summer riding heaps and living over there. And he introduced me to a few guys from Cairns, and then just had sort of like a friends group who are from up that way. And that's sort of how I ended up trying to base myself up there in the last few years. So yeah, definitely met so many cool people over there, and still keep in touch with a lot of crew from that era. Yeah, it was a really, really good time of life, and I'd recommend it to any youngster who's keen to go over there. I would just say, like, drop everything and do it. Just like experience that.
Yeah, I was overseas in Asia for a long time, and but I wish I kind of spent more time in Whistler and did that thing as well, because man, it's such a good experience and so good to kind of learn like how to live off $5 an hour or $11 an hour, and that you don't need money to have fun.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Even like, the Banzak guys are showing what it's about in Queenstown now. I'd just say even Tassie or something like that, if somebody was super into riding and just wanted to ride a lot, I would just say go and immerse yourself in it, and yeah, just do whatever you can, like job wise, to make it happen, and meet more people and just experience that.
And after, like, I guess at that point of time, like Jacobs Trail or World Trail would have been one of the first kind of trail building companies in Australia, if not the world. Was it good experience for you to kind of bring back what you learnt about trails in Canada to Australia, or is it such a different scene and terrain? Like it doesn't.
Oh, yeah, everywhere is different, but I've always like taken inspiration from different places that I've ridden, and I was almost like reluctant to call myself a trail builder in the early days, because it didn't feel like a real job. It was just, that fun job where I just thought I was doing it for a little while to fund, my riding shenanigans. And yeah, it did feel really cool to be there with Glen in the early days, and watch the company grow, and even, spend time just with Glen and hear about his experiences when he was doing stuff for the UCI over the years, and just try and take in some of the knowledge that he has, and try and interpret what he can visualize, and then be able to recreate that through, building a trail. So it was, really cool to be there, and it's cool to see where the industry's got to now. I never dreamed that I would have turned that sort of hobby style job into a career and be in it over 10 years later.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, is like at that point, trail building might have just seemed like you have 2 or 3 people that do it as a full-time job, and then the rest are just those casuals that are funding their bikes. But it's an actual proper career now with skills, and like you got to know how to drive an excavator, you got to know how to build towards the land. There's certain planning and government things. Like, it's such a different job now. Was it hard to kind of adapt to all that, or you just kind of learned it as you were going along because you were evolving with the industry?
Yeah, it was just really organic, I think. Like, when I started, I got stoked to use the power carrier or the whippersnipper, or, like just cutting trail was sick. And then I got my chainsaw ticket. That was sort of like one of the first things that I got. And then not long after that, I got my excavator ticket. And it just sort of organically evolved. And one job you'd have 2 people in your crew, and then the next job you might have 5. And then a couple of years later that you're trying to manage 10 or 15 people and stuff like that. So it just evolved over time. And I definitely have learned a hell of a lot along the way, and still learning. I definitely don't feel like I know it all, and I want to keep getting better and understand it more. And still take inspiration from everything that I see when I'm out riding, and try and figure out how I can do things better, and keep learning, I guess.
I guess like in that time as well, we've seen the styles of trails change, because I can't remember having flow tracks or green kind of jumpy trails back in the day, whereas now they're a dime a dozen. And I guess bikes are changing so much as well. What are your thoughts on the way that trails are kind of evolving, and what riders want?
Yeah, I think that's a huge one. Even now, I'm back at Mount Buller at the moment. We're just getting started on upgrading all the XC trails. And I was thinking back to when these trails were built. They were built for XC bikes that probably didn't even have a dropper post, so it's tight corners. Whereas now everyone's got, you've got like a playful hardtail or an XC, like an Epic Evo, all the way through to an Enduro, where you need to try and build a trail that's going to be fun for all those styles of riders. So, yeah, it's changed so much over the years. And definitely when I got back from after I lived in Canada for like that year, doing the 2 summers and the winter, I think I was kind of a bit like disenchanted about the whole downhill thing, because I got back and it was just such an effort. You couldn't just roll up to the chairlift and do runs for 8 hours. If you wanted to go and do downhill runs, you had to figure out who was driving, and you might spend a whole day out there, and your accumulative time on the bike was half an hour. If you've done runs today, it's just like all these little add-ups of 2 minutes here, 2 minutes there. And I was trying to, World Trail had a deal with Specialized where staff could get a bit of a discount, and I was trying to get a demo, a downhill bike, and there were none available, and somebody else had asked for a price on this just alloy enduro. It was pretty mid-spec, and I saw that and I was like, shit, maybe I'll just get that. Like Glen's always raving about his enduro, I'll give that a shot. And as soon as I got that and just started riding around Buller, it sort of opened my eyes again and made me fall in love with that style of riding, where you were going out, you'd still have to obviously pedal up, but it felt like you could still throw that bike around and have fun on the descents. And you just got, instead of like a 3-minute run, you'd go out and you're on the bike for 3 hours. And it just happened to coincide when enduro racing started to pick up a bit in Australia and change.
Well, that enduro, like that pretty much changed the market. That was one of the first bikes that you grab and just go and pedal and bomb down hills. It was one of the first big hitting bikes. Like it must have been pretty cool to be on that bike at that time.
Yeah. I think I know when my first enduro is. Like, I think I sold it to a mate and he sold it to another mate. So I'd love to try and get that back one day, just to hang on the wall. But yeah, it was such a cool bike, and it just felt like it opened up so many more opportunities to be on the bike more and go out there. And I was still racing or riding downhill around that time and racing a little bit, but then it just opened up another door of like meeting more people with that enduro sort of race. And yeah, I love that. And it just sort of gave me something new to focus on, I think.
Because you were at a couple of, like, I checked out Roots and Rain, but you were at a couple of the like enduro nationals and stuff. Like you took that pretty seriously as well, right?
Yeah, early on it was like mostly Vic stuff. Ben Watkins, sorry, my little sausage dog's getting a bit stir crazy. Yeah, I'm just letting him out the door. Yeah, the Vic Enduro series early on was kind of like similar to a downhill race, but you would just do it on your little bike, and you might do 2 timed runs instead of 1 or 2 or 3 or 2 different. And then after a year or so, it evolved to actually having to pedal up and stuff like that. And I did a couple of like full national seasons, I think, probably around 2013 or 14. And had a lot of fun with that. Got a couple of podiums and stuff, and that's sort of how I got a bit of support from all Well, actually, I was trying to get a deal on a bike after I'd ridden that alloy one into the ground. They were just releasing like the new version. It was like an updated X-wing of the Enduro, and it was all, the S-Works was all carbon, and the contact we had, he was like, yeah, it'll be here like next month, and it just went on for a few months, and then he was like, oh no, there's none available. Like, I can't. They're under that much like high demand. I can't give one out, or I'd give you a discount on one through marketing. And I was so bummed out. And Glenn was just like, man, if you want that bike, just go and buy one. And I was like, oh, did a quick Google, found a shop in Melbourne that had one, and I pretty much just called them up the next day. And I was like, I've got cash. Like, what's the best deal you can do? And they took like 500 off. So I think I just paid like $8.5 cash for this bike. And that's, yeah, when I sort of got into that enduro series, and it lit a bit of a fire in me. I was like, this is what I want to do, and this is what I want to race. And then following on from that, yeah, the next year is when I first got support from Specialized Australia and was sort of put on as their first enduro athlete, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, it's pretty rad. Yeah, those those newer X-Wings ones, especially that S-Works, man, they were everywhere at that time. Back when Specialized was cheap at $8.5
Yeah, it felt like that was the upper limit back then, but now that's like a mid-range bike.
So you've been with Specialized like almost 10 years then. Like, it's been a long time.
It might have been around like late 2013 or 2014 that I started. Late 2013, I think I started chatting to them. And to go along with the Muffin nickname, I got like an invite to go down to their office. It was just before Christmas, and we'd been emailing back and forth, and it was looking promising. And I was like, I'll bake a batch of muffins to take into the office. And I cut out like the S logo and sprinkled icing sugar on them, so they looked like legit branded muffins. And yeah, that was a good meeting. That's when they offered me a spot on the team, and managed to get a bike like a couple of days later, which was insane. So that was the first bike I got given, and I've actually still got it. It's at my dad's place. He's been riding it for the last few years, and it actually got stolen last year, I think, and managed to get it back through this really crazy convoluted way. Like, the police called Specialized and said, they've got this bike, can you check the serial number? And they must have punched it in and said, oh no, this has never been sold to a shop, it must be an ambassador bike. And then somebody who worked at Specialized, who I didn't know, got onto me somehow, and they're like, oh, we think, I think I saw something about you losing a bike a while ago. Do you have the serial number? And I was like, man, no way. Like, I don't think I would have written that down. But I did always try and get kooky angles with a GoPro. And I just happened to be at home that day when they called me, and I started going through old hard drives and looking at GoPro footage, and there was one where I'd mounted it to the frame, and you could see the sticker like underneath the top way. Sheet. And I called up the police station. I was like, I'm pretty sure this is the number, and they're like, yeah, that's it. Like, this is your bike. You can come get it. So thankfully, it went back.
That never happened. Like, yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, I thought it was gone forever, and I was super bummed. Like, I don't care about like the value of it or anything. It was just like a sentimental thing. I'd love to be able to have that hanging on the wall in 20 years' time.
Getting a bike from Specialized and being on their team and stuff, like, that's a huge deal. Like, it's nothing small. And I mean, you've got to be one of the most kind of sponsored, famous trail riders in Australia, or trail builders, sorry, in Australia right now. So to still be with them and still be doing that, it's got to be pretty cool.
Yeah, I feel super fortunate. And even as I slowed down with racing, I guess I raced enduro, and that was my focus for quite a while. And I had some good results here in Australia in 2015, I think it was. Early in 2015, it was kind of like the first decent proper enduro was held up here at Mount Buller. And they got like Jerome Clements and Richie Root, Sam Hill, Troy Brosnan, Gravesy. So it was like the first legit enduro in Australia. And I was like, well, I know those trails. Like, I'm gonna have a red hot crack at this. and went out on that weekend, and yeah, like it couldn't have gone much better. I managed to get third, so I was standing on a podium with Gravesy. He was first. Troy was second. Gravesy smoked everyone by like a minute. Troy pipped me by a few seconds, and I was third, and I think Richie was fourth, and Sam Hill was fifth. So that was a pretty epic podium to stand on, and definitely love looking back at that photo.
You beat Sam Hill. Like, let's be honest, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I guess two of those guys went on to be EWS world champions like multiple times. I think both Richie and Sam. So definitely,
they're pretty good.
Wish I could have done the same, but later that year, so sort of due to that result, I think I got a wild card to race that whole EWS season, and because it was the first time I'd done, I think, one or two EWSs in Whistler a year or two before that. But maybe the first one wasn't even called an EWS. It was just the beginning of, that new age of enduro racing. And I got this wild card, and I thought instead of trying to bust my ass and do 8 races around the world in a year, I was going to go to Roto because that was the first stop for that season. Then I was going to come back and train just solid. I was going to finish up with World Trail, just take time off to train, and then go over to Europe, do 1 or 2 in France, and then head straight over to Canada. So that was like my year set out. I had my money saved. I had some really good support from Specialized Australia and a couple other brands at the time. And then I got over to Roto. I was actually traveling around with Tim Bardsley-Smith in his van that he'd demoed. And I was just like loving it. I got there a few days early and cruised around Christchurch, and we drove up to Roto and did the rider briefing. And then the first day, the first practice session was on the downhill course, which was going to be like the final stage. And this was probably maybe a Wednesday or a Thursday. And then the race was probably the Saturday. So it was like, try and get everything you can dialed on this downhill course, but then it's probably going to change a shitload because they're going to race a downhill racing by the time that you get to race it again. So I was trying to be pretty calculated and smart. I did like 1 or 2 cruisy runs and just misjudged where I was. I'd like started to dial in the top section, and I misjudged where I was when I came into the woods and saw a bit of a fadeaway. And I recall looking at it before and being like, oh, you can just, fade off this, and it's a pretty long landing. But looking back at some of the GoPro footage I had, I actually misjudged which one it was. There was 2 that looked similar.
Oh no!
I don't know exactly what happened. I remember going off it and sort of realizing this isn't good. I don't know whether I'd know or a route or something, but the next thing I knew, I was waking up like getting carried out of there on a spinal board, pretty dazed and confused. And that was sort of at the end of that season. I ended up dislocating my left collarbone out the front. So there was nothing, they can't really do surgery when you do that.
Yeah.
And that was sore, but I was strapped in, like I couldn't move anything. And there was all this chat about potential neck injury and stuff. And somehow, time was really weird as it happened. Like, I felt like I woke up and I was already on a stretcher, and then next thing I'm already in like the first aid truck, and then next thing I'm down at the first aid tent, and Paddy Young, who was working for Specialized at the time, he just appeared and he was like, "You all good? Like, what's happening?" And he was like, "I'll go get some of your gear." And then it just felt like 5 seconds passed, and he was back, and he'd already found like all my gear, like my wallet and change of clothes and stuff from the van. And then next thing I sort of came to again, and Bardo was taking photos of me as I was getting pushed into an ambulance. And then the next memory I have, I was in hospital and I was sort of wigging out because I was like, man, I think I've done something pretty bad here with my neck. Like, I can't move. But it was because I was strapped in so hard to the spinal board. And I just felt this doctor, "Oh, we're going to check your neck." And they go, "How's this, this, and this?" And I was like, "Yeah, that seems good." Now, "Okay, you're fine." And they just ripped that off. And I was like, "Oh, that's a huge relief." And then my wrist started to feel a bit sore, and I managed to have my phone somehow. The paramedic must have got it out of my pocket. and I couldn't lift up my head or anything, but I managed to take a photo of my wrist and then look at it, and it was just mangled. It was like my
Oh,
arm came, stepped up at a 90 degree and then went another 90 to where my hand was. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, man, I'm not coming out of this one easy. Like, this is going to be a long road to recovery. And had surgery on that in New Zealand. And thankfully, one of my good mates from Whistler, Tristan Merrick, he was over at Crankworks in Roto doing some of the commentating. So instead of me having to go back and sleep in the van, he hooked me up in the hotel that he was staying in and looked after me for a couple of days. But then I still had to travel with Bardzo back to the South Island to be able to fly home. So I had to sleep in a little bunk bed in the back of the van for a couple of nights, all banged up, which was pretty challenging. So then after that, I just sort of focused on, I realized pretty quick that even though there was a fair bit of time until the next EWS races that I'd got into, I realized it probably wasn't going to happen. The recovery was pretty slow. So I just sort of changed my focus to try and get better. And yeah, I guess the good thing for World Trail was after 3 months of healing, I was ready to go back on the trails. I didn't just disappear into the racing scene. So I just got straight back into trail building, and I think that sort of changed my focus a bit. After having a pretty heavy crash like that, I was just pretty motivated to, and it was at a time where, you know, things had evolved with World Trail, and it wasn't just a couple of us working on a crew. There were multiple crews and multiple projects. So I was, moving up as one of the senior guys in the team, and I just realised that, you know, maybe I can do more with this, and that was my focus. I still tried to race a little bit, but I just felt that I'd lost that little bit of that edge that you need to push it beyond what you're comfortable. I was pretty hesitant if I felt like I was, you know, going to have to put my arm out and stuff like that. And even today, it's still kind of painful in the wrist doing certain things. So I've just learned to manage it and try and hold back a bit, I guess. And then that focus changing from racing, I was like, well, thankfully the insurance covered my time off being injured. So I was like, I've got a bit of money stashed away. I was going to blow on racing. So that's when I started to look at, trying to find a base for myself after living the gypsy life, being a trail builder for quite a few years. And I ended up getting a place up in Cairns. And that's where I based myself since about 2016, I think.
Yeah, sick.
And that felt really cool to finally have, you know, somewhere to call my own and have a shed where I could set it up the way I wanted. And yeah, it was really cool.
What was so obviously you would have had like a pretty solid concussion. You obviously knocked out and stuff, like these days it's pretty, like I've hit my head way too many times for the amount of brain cells I have. But like, what was the recovery like from the head hit and the wrist, like at that time? Because it was still kind of unknown, right? Like these days people kind of know what to expect.
Yeah, it was it's interesting that you say that as well, because I think when I got to him, obviously I'd been unconscious for, I'm not sure how long. I'm pretty sure Sven has a couple of photos of me on the ground. He was right there when I hit the tree. And at first I didn't want to see him. And then a while, I think when he was in quarantine and he was doing that like 14 days and 14 years or whatever, like, man, if you come across those photos, like shoot him through. I'm ready to see him, but I've never seen him. So I'm not sure if he's got a sequence of me crashing or what, but yeah, I was definitely out for a while on the ground, and then I think they had to put me under to try and manipulate my wrist because it was dislocated before surgery. So I think they did that once I got to hospital. Then the next day, they were taking me in for surgery early in the morning, and the anaesthetist actually made some comment about, you know, like, this is all standard procedure, but we do have to tell you you were unconscious yesterday, then you were put under, and now we're going to put you under again. Like, it adds to the risk, the minimal risk or whatever that goes along with that. So again, like just before you're about to get put under to go in for an operation, it's not the greatest thing to hear. And then I don't know. I was definitely bummed out about the whole thing, and even when I got back home, my brother's a doctor, so thankfully he had some colleagues who I could go and see, and I had to get a secondary operation on my wrist to try and stabilize it a bit better. But yeah, it was definitely like a tough time mentally to try and get through it. But I think the way I dealt with it was I still just tried to get out and do stuff. Like once I was able to, I was in a sling and a cast for a long time, but I remember going down to Derby to hang out for a weekend or so because it was like the first time there was a race down there. It was like the XC Marathon national championships or something. So I went down there, and then not long after that, there was a race over in Adelaide, and I went over there because I just wanted to go and hang out with mates like Bars and Clarkey and stuff like that.
Yep.
And then not long after that, I was like, oh, we'll just go up to Cairns and kill some time. So I went and hung out with like Ev and some mates up there. And then I even, towards the end of my recovery, I actually went over to Fiji with my dad because he does a lot of volunteer stuff over there. So I just went and like lived off the grid in this little village that's like a 2-hour boat ride inland up this river, and hung out there with the locals and had a really cool experience doing that. So that was probably the best thing I could have done, I think, to deal with it instead of just getting stuck in my head and thinking about all the what ifs and stuff like that. But yeah, it was still definitely tough. And even it might have been early 2017, I spent a bit of time with Win Masters down in Derby doing like a video shoot for the EWS promo. And I'd met him a couple of times, but I'd never really spent much time with him, and it was really cool just to hang out. And he's put a lot of thought and looked into a lot about like, head injuries and stuff like that. And it was pretty insightful what he was telling me. So I think it's really cool what he's doing and trying to raise awareness with it and stuff like that.
Oh, for sure. Like, yeah, I mean, I've had ones that have lasted 6 months from concussion. And yeah, the whole healing process behind it is so unknown that when you're in it, you can't see a light, and it's kind of weird. But yeah, I definitely get what you're saying about just doing stuff. Like I remember when I did my wrist, which was a similar thing, like I dislocated my wrist, and basically the ends of my bones ended up on top of my hand, and they broke as well. Like, so my arm got about 6 inches shorter. But yeah, like out of the hospital and went and watched a race like the next day. Like it's the best thing to do is just get out there and get stoked.
Definitely. Yeah. It's always good to keep yourself busy and try and find like the positives out of any situation, I think.
And so you've built the trails, just this just popped into my head, but you've built the trails at Buller, like some of the first XC trails. You've been a part of Forest, I think, as well, and Derby. So you've been a part of like 3 major emerging trail systems.
Yeah, Forest was a little bit before my time, but that's where I guess I got introduced to mountain biking, and that's where I had that chance encounter with Glen the very first time. So I guess I could, if that day didn't happen, I don't know where I'd be. I definitely wouldn't be sitting in this seat, I don't think. So it's pretty cool to think back to like one point in time where it fully shaped the direction that my life went. So that was pretty cool.
What was it like? You were a major part of Derby, correct? Like you were a pretty big builder down there, and that seems to have that was like a major explosion of what mountain biking can do for a small town in Australia. It seemed like that kind of set the theme and what people can actually do with mountain biking. All right, like what was it like being a part of that?
Yeah, I never would have dreamt of what it has become. I'd just come off the back of building the epic trail up at Buller that summer, and I felt like I was really finding my style and being able to build stuff that was in pretty challenging terrain and be happy with the outcome. And I was getting like some good response from Glen as well. Like he wasn't on the trail as much, and it was more up to me to just figure it out, and he'd come back and check on it, and he'd, you know, give you a pat on the back instead of spraying, you know, move that rock there and all that sort of thing. So I was definitely coming off a bit of a high building that, and I got to Derby, and I'd looked it up on the map, and I was like, oh yeah, it looks kind of cool, little town. There's like a lake nearby and just trees, you know, right on the doorstep of the township. And a weird thing, I don't know if all trail builders do this, but you always take notice of dirt. So like the whole drive there from Devonport, towing the excavator, I'm like looking at hills, like cuttings on the road, and being like, what's this dirt going to be like when we get there? And got to Derby, and I was like, what the hell is this place? Like, there's nothing going on here. It's just a ghost town. And then it was cool, like the very, as soon as you get on the trail, like it feels like you're in the middle of nowhere. And even the first day, I think we just did a little drive around, and we drove up to what's now known as Devil Wolf, and that just felt like it was in the middle of nowhere. But that's on the beginner loop. That's like the easiest, or one of the easiest points to get to now. And we drove up towards the dam, and that just felt like it was, you know, forever away. And then, you know, fast forward a couple of years, there's trails going around that. So it just felt like this massive area, and I was I was definitely skeptical, I guess, because I was like, what the hell's going on here? And the first area we built in that valley that the river runs through, that's not the natural course of the river. It's been mined for over 100 years and just totally destroyed, and it's come back really well, like the vegetation, but it just felt like we were never digging into natural ground. It was either sand, like river sand, or massive boulders that had been piled up as overburden from the mine. And we were trying to cut this green trail through this area, and you'd be traversing along, and then all of a sudden you've got to gain 10 meters elevation to get up to the next flat spot. And that's how, you know, something like the Twisties section, which is pretty iconic. I remember just standing at the bottom of this and being like, this is fucked. Like, what are we meant to do here? And hating on it. And then, you know, you just start digging, and we figured it out, and it turned into be like one of the most iconic sections of trail for that destination. So I think that first stint I did down there, we did maybe 3 months, and it was coming into winter, and the morale was definitely low. Times where I was questioning what I was doing, and yeah, definitely not thinking about the positives. I was more focusing on the negatives. And yeah, there was times where I thought about throwing the towel in, but that definitely taught me a bit of resilience. And then once we came back, I think we went away for a couple of months to do another job up in northern Queensland. And we came back, and then we started working further out from the township and finding cool terrain and stuff like that. And instead of coming up against a big rock slab and thinking, oh, this is shit, what are we going to, you can't build here. It was like, all right, like, what do we have to do to be able to incorporate this, and how can we get the machine around it? And instead of creating trails that were basically an excavator width trail, it was more about make the trails blend in with that natural terrain a lot more. And then, yeah, it just sort of flowed on from there. The further out we got, the more epic the terrain got. We did the Blue Tier as well. And yeah, I just sort of fell in love with Derby after getting to know it a little bit more, and definitely enjoyed my time in Tassie. I think out of the last, 6 or 7 years, I spent the majority of my time down there. Even when I was based in Cairns, I was spending more time in Tassie working than what I was at home. So it just feels like one of those places where there's never nothing to do. There's always somewhere to explore there. And especially now, it took a couple of years down there, but once Buck set up that Vertigo shop in the main street, we were actually living in a cottage right behind it. That was when it sort of hit me, and I was like, this place is sick. Like, there's actually a bit of a vibe here now. There's like a local riding community. The existing community there had the opportunity to sell up and stuff like that. And there was definitely some people who weren't fans of mountain biking, which I totally understand. And it was a bit of a shame that there was a little bit of, not conflict, but, a little bit of, disappointment that the town was changing. But it's kind of cool that a block of a house that might have been worth 50 grand is now worth 300. They were able to be compensated, I guess, if they did want to leave the town. And
they weren't complaining once their house got sold. Like,
yeah, I'm thinking myself, I didn't buy a house there that first day I showed up.
Because it's fun. Like, how do you balance trying to build a trail with a machine to something that you want it to be, or building with the terrain to make it fit that kind of side of the hill? I'm always a fan of trails that go with that second option, but obviously sometimes you just got to build something to suit what your task is.
Yeah, it's I think I've always been super critical of what I'm doing, which is probably a good thing and a bad thing, because I'll then overthink what I'm doing a bit as well. But it's, I guess, from the beginning, the idea of what we were trying to do, what Glen was trying to do, was lift the industry. And if we were just going to be building double black diamond, like gnarly jumps and stuff, that's not going to help the bike industry get more people into it. Whereas if you build for that 80% of riders who are, that intermediate style, or maybe just, going from beginner to intermediate and then starting to progress, you're going to try and entice more people into it. And obviously the more people who are into it, the more funding for trails and stuff like that. So that was sort of the idea of building stuff where, and there's definitely times, like, I think if I had to count out every trail I've built, there's probably more trails I've built that are just mellow and cruisy than the fun ones. It's kind of rare to build something where you are like really excited to ride it and know that you're building it for your ability. So there's just a lot of stuff that went into it over the years and like there's so many things that I built and didn't work well, and that's what I've learned from over the years. And that's why I love going back to places where I've worked, and especially now being up here at Bulla, like I didn't build everything up here, but I was here for a lot of the builds, starting out on a rake and then getting into a machine. It is super interesting to see stuff where you think a drain is sufficient, and then we're here 10 years later and that drain's non-existent. There's just the trails drop potentially like a foot deeper than what it used to be. So there's so much that goes into it, and so much that you just sort of can't figure out unless you put the time in. And I don't think there's a way to speed that up. Like, it's definitely, I'm not saying that to be a good trail builder now you've got to do 10 years before you're going to get there. Like, it's going to be way quicker because there's so much more knowledge out there and there's so many more people doing it. But it definitely takes time and experiences to figure out what works and what doesn't work, and sort of figuring out your own style as well.
Yeah, you can usually tell when someone's built a trail. It's weird. Like, you can just tell that there's certain trails. Like, I can probably spot a Trailscapes trail from miles away. Like, I just know what they're doing. It's really weird. Does that come down to your own kind of personal riding style, do you think, as well?
Yeah, I think so. And it's just such a unique thing building a trail, because you could give the same flag line, the same terrain to 10 different trail builders, like someone from World Trail, someone from Dirt Art, someone from Trailscape, someone from Common Ground. It's still up to that individual person to interpret that flag line. It's not, there's no detailed design like a road. There's just not that much budget to be able to go out there and engineer everything and survey everything. So I think that's really cool. And actually, I think one of the early podcasts I listened to that you did was with Sam Moore, and he had this awesome comment that he made about when he was hustling to try and make Fist a thing, and he was working for Lusty. I think he was the rep for Deaf Gloves as well. And someone was like, dude, what are you doing? Like, how can you be selling someone else's gloves when you sell gloves? He's like, well, why the fuck not? Like, they make gloves and I make gloves. Like, that's rad. Like, I want to support them too. And that made me think about it and compare it to like the trail building thing. Like, I don't think there should be this them and us, or any competition sort of thing. Like, obviously, like, a healthy industry is always going to have that, but I just think it's cool that there are so many companies building trails, and there are different, levels and stuff like that. It could be sort of like a one-man band, and then there's like the bigger companies like World Trail and Dirt Art and stuff. But I just love seeing that it is becoming a thing. Like I managed to turn it into a career, and it's super cool to see other people. Like I really enjoyed listening to Tom Mallet on your podcast as well, because it was cool to hear his point of view and stuff like that. And it was super relatable, because it does feel like kind of a unique thing. And it's just interesting to hear, like, well, everyone's just sort of doing the same thing. They all build trails because they love building them. So,
well, I think we've got Fox Creek is getting rebuilt, and I think we have 4 different trail companies, and I think it's something like 50 operators, like all on the same hill. Wow. And they're all just working together and making it cool. Like, I think this whole industry, like as you see it with bike companies as well, like there's this whole myth that there's this random industry rivalry. But you go to an event and everyone's just drinking beers together. Like you see each other at every event.
That's the thing. Like,
you're all mates. Like it doesn't matter at the end of the day.
Yeah, for sure. Like I just think it's such a cool thing that what we get to do. You know, we get paid to go and hang out and be in nature and build trails. Like you can't really get bummed out about that.
What was it like when so you were racing enduro, you've kind of raced the EWS, you came out of it, you went and built some trails in Derby, and then you get awarded, like you were the head trail builder for a trail that got awarded best trail for 2017.
Yeah.
How epic was that for you?
Again, that's something that like you would never even dream of. And I hadn't been racing as much leading up to that, but then I was once, it was all sort of falling into place. I got pretty hungry to race it again. And we had a meeting with Ian Harwood and Chris Ball probably late the year before, like before we started to build a couple of those specific trails for the event. And we sort of showed them a few areas. And one of the key things Chris said was, he's like, don't try and milk this hill. He's like, if there's good, like gnarly stuff straight down or, and it's a bit shorter in time, he's like, don't just try and stretch it out because you think X amount of stages have to add up to 20 minutes or whatever. He's like, just make it as best as it can be with what you've got here. And that was cool to hear. And then straight after that, I spent probably longer than what Glen and that wanted me to. I just spent like 2 days with Nev, who you've had on as well. He was working with me at the time. And Segi, who's got Ride More now. And I was like, let's just walk this whole hill. Like, let's find everything that's cool on it and try and join the dots. And we were cruising around and all these massive boulders that was looking promising. And then we just happened to stumble across the now infamous chute crack thing through the rocks. And we were just like, this is it. Like, this is going to be cool. There was even like below that feature, straight down the hill, there's another rock formation that's similar but closed in at the top, so it's more like a tunnel, but the entry is too narrow for a set of bars, and it sort of tapers wider the lower you go. But we didn't want to potentially like start digging for a day and realize that it was not going to work, so we didn't put that one in. But I went home, like once we'd found that crack, I got a set of bars because my wrist doesn't work too good. If I do push-ups, I do it on handlebars. So I took them up there the next day and like taped into a shovel about what height it would be on a bike, and sat them in there. And I've still got the photo of like this shovel sitting in that crack with the handlebars. And there was like, 10 mil either side. And I was like, I think this will work.
I remember like on Pink Bike, they were asking, like it was a whole topic of discussion was just around that crack and if people were cutting their bars for it.
Yeah.
There was
I can't remember the words exactly, but it might have been like an Instagram post or something, and someone had like the best comment about it, saying like the trail builders managed to pry that open under the full moon on like, and had this whole story to it. And I wish I had saved it or something. It was just pretty funny how it was written out. But yeah,
They
not
hired,
only getting
they hired
yeah,
Thor to come down with his hammer and crack the rock, and yeah.
yeah, that was it. But yeah, not only having the opportunity to build trails for that level, it was kind of nerve wracking, but um, we were confident we were making, good use of what we had there, and then being able to race, it was really cool. I had a terrible race. I was feeling so good on the lead up, and I was lucky enough to be staying with the specialised team for the week leading up. So I had Graves, Ian Curtis as um,
Oh,
I was sort of
sick.
showing them around the trails that we could ride, um, and I just felt like I was really like getting back on to a bit of speed, and practice was going really good. And then on that on sheer pin, that the wheel eating rock garden section, like I had that line dialed from the first time I hit it. With Win filming, I just knew exactly where to lift and where to push and stuff like that. And I don't know how I just must have caught a rock, and I've never blown up a wheel as bad as what I did on that day in practice, and just fully like frazzled me. And thankfully, like Specialized had another wheel, so I could go down. And I should have just called it for the day and been like, nah, I know every square inch of these trails, I'm good. But I rushed back out, and I was like pedaling across to catch up with Graves and Curtis, and nearly ran over a snake. I like jumped that and then got up to the next trail, and I thought, oh, I won't go all the way to the top. I'll just drop in halfway. Like I know the top, it's all good. And then had this stupid over the bars crash on a section that I've ridden 100 times, and just sort of knocked the confidence a fair bit. And then to put all that hard work in, and like those trails had zero rain, I reckon, before the event. Like that whole 3 months leading up, it just felt like it didn't rain. So we'd sort of managed to get them pretty stable, but they were definitely getting chopped up from the amount of traffic on them in practice. And to wake up on that Sunday and just have it pissing down, the biggest kick in the nuts. And yeah, I think I should have, been able to ride. Like I'd ridden there in the rain so much as well. Like it shouldn't have phased me, but yeah, when you're pedaling up to stage 2 and you've already your goggles are wet and you can feel water running down your arm into your gloves, it's pretty hard to keep motivated. And I just made silly mistakes, and I can't even recall what I ended up. It was probably in the 60s or something, which was disappointing. And I was really hoping to try and pull out a good result, but to then have that was early in the season, and then to have the whole season go on, I think that was called the Enduro Wet Series that year.
Yeah.
But to get recognised and have that trail awarded best of the year was like mind blowing, because it goes to these places that are so iconic around the world, and then that was just little old Derby. A lot of people, even Aussies, were skeptical of it being a worthy venue. So it was cool to sort of get that validation from the riders and the teams to say that they enjoyed it, and stoked to get that.
And so after all that, and you've been through what almost, was it 10 years at World Trail Plus, and you've been doing some amazing things with them, and you're known as the guy from World Trail. You've kind of gone out on your own into like a smaller business now. And I guess like what was the reasoning behind that? And has it been quite a scary jump?
Yeah, it was definitely a big decision to make. So last year, or 2019, was like probably one of my busiest years. I look back through my camera roll, and I was in Tassie a lot for work, and like still managed to. Glenn and I went over to Austria to design a trail, and it was just starting to progress that there was going to be some international work and stuff like that. And had a couple of massive trips that year and did a bit of racing. So felt like 2019 was just going crazy, and then had big plans for 2020. Initially my partner and I were going to move to Warburton at the start of the year, assuming that was going to start, and then that got delayed. So I had to keep doing the back and forth sort of thing with Tassie. I was working at finishing off the St. Helens network with World Trail. And then, COVID hit, and it sort of, nobody really knew what was happening in the beginning. And I pretty much had, I think I must have been about to fly home like a week later, and realised if I didn't fly home that day, I was probably going to get stuck in Tassie. So
Mm.
I flew back to camp, and luckily World Trail had a couple of projects up there, a couple of pump tracks and a walking track. So it worked out really well that I could still, stay at home and work, which was a rarity for me. It hasn't happened very often in the last 10 years or more. But yeah, sorry, before that, we were meant to go over to Austria again for work, and I was going to have this big holiday with my partner, Bond, and all that sort of got canned. And then we've been talking for a while that we wanted to start a family, and we thought, well, why not now? Like, it's a good time to start trying. And thankfully we were, able to fall pregnant relatively quickly. So even until the end of last year, I was still trying to figure out how I was going to make it work with World Trail. And, the options were like, bring the fam with me and try and figure that out, which would have been challenging. And then, around Christmas time, my good friend Evan, who's based up in Cairns, he's been operating as Contour Works for a couple of years. And before that, he had like a landscaping and trail building business that he was running. He's built trails all over the place. New Zealand, he built Rude Rock. He's built over in Japan. Worked with World Trail even before I started. So, he'd started taking on a few more bigger projects, and we just got chatting, and he was like, things are going to change for you with having a little one. And he's actually just had his first child as well. So we just got chatting, and then that's when it all sort of came to be starting to be a reality. And then it was definitely a tough call to make to finish with World Trail because we had been together for so long. Definitely feels like a big family there with Glen and Dylan and Jared and Reese that have been there since the beginning when I started. So it was definitely a tough call to make, but I'm very thankful that they understood my point of view and the fact that I wanted to try and be able to stay close with my family now and starting a young family. And so, that was like the driving force behind going out and joining forces with Ev as Contour Works.
Yeah, it's sick. It was pretty surprising to see the whole Insta thing because, as I said, you were Mr. World Trail for a bit there. Like everyone knew that it was like it's peas in the pod, right? Like if it's Ryan De La Rue, it's World Trail. Like, but then you go and made this huge leap. It was a big surprise. It was definitely cool to see.
And it was something like even until the beginning of this year, it was something that I never really thought I would do. I always thought, I was going to be with World Trail for as long as I could foresee in the future. I've never been one to have a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan or anything. I always just make the most of the opportunities that were presented to me. But it just felt like the timing was right, and I'm super stoked on the amount of time I've been able to spend with Bon and our little girl Olivia, who arrived in March this year. It's definitely life changing, and I'm currently away from them at the moment. I drove down to Bulla last week, and they're going to fly down in like a couple of weeks' time. So it's the first time I've been away from a little girl for more than a couple of days. So it's really challenging, but I just can't wait to get her on a bike and get her stoked.
Get a shovel and a bike and get started together. That's sick.
Yeah.
Might start wrapping things up a little bit here. But there's one question I really wanted to know because it's pretty important to you and it's everywhere. But how do you go about brewing your coffee on the side of a trail? Like it seems like that's one of the biggest parts of your day.
Yeah, definitely. Like I was always, I don't know, coffee's changed a lot since I started drinking it when I was in hospitality. But I think when I was in Canada, I started to enjoy black coffee. And then just randomly, a guy I worked with introduced me to this little thing called a mocha pot, which is like the bottom chamber that has the water. You put your basket in, put your ground coffee in, screw it together and heat it up. And I was like, that's like the ultimate thing for the trail. It's just one vessel. You throw your coffee in, heats up, you just pour it into a cup and you're good to go. And so I was already onto the black coffee thing when I started doing that, but I'd still have a little bit of sugar or something. And I just started offering it out at Smoko and stuff, and it became a bit of a thing. And my favorite saying is like, I'll make you a coffee however you want on the trail as long as it's black. And there's been a few guys over the years. Like I think even when Grand Muddy worked with us down in Tassie, I think I turned him into a black coffee drinker. And I'm sure there's quite a few over the years, but it just sort of flowed on from that, and it's pretty cool. Like there was times when I was with the World Trail crew. Generally, you just sort of working in your own crew, and there might be multiple crews on the hill, but you're pretty spread out. But there was one day we were working together, and I looked around. There was like 4 or 5 different coffee setups, so it was pretty cool.
That's so good.
Yeah, I've just got interested in it over the years, and in the last couple of years, I've got into roasting. After I got my place up in Kent, at a nursery, and I saw a coffee tree for sale, so I was like, damn, I want one of them, see what I can do. So I've got 2 coffee trees, and in the last 2 years I've harvested beans off those and gone through the very painstakingly slow process of trying to turn a coffee cherry into a roasted coffee bean. And I've actually got some, I just roasted some before I left home last week, so they should be good next week to try, which is kind of nerve-wracking because I've lost track of the amount of hours I've spent, peeling them by hand and then soaking them and peeling them again and then roasting them and stuff like that. So it's a lot of effort to go to for potentially a mediocre tasting cup of coffee. But I guess I enjoy the process and enjoy trying different types of coffees. And I've been getting into filter coffee recently. So that's like where I'm going now with it. I still do the mocha pot out on the trail, and I think nearly every day. When I'm in Cairns, it's not as the heat isn't as appealing to have a hot black coffee. But recently was the first time I figured out I could fill my Yeti thermos with ice blocks and do an iced coffee at Smoko. So that was a game changer up there.
Yeah, you're definitely the only guy I know that's growing coffee and going to that route. But yeah, the filter coffee is like a huge US thing. Like every time I see something in US about coffee, it's all filter. It's a whole different.
So I'm trying to figure out and listen to a few different podcasts and stuff and figure out the ratios and how much time and weights. It's a bit more, it's fiddly and a bit more pretentious, I think, but it's just something different. And I enjoy that sort of process, and it's not something I do every day with the filter thing, but it's kind of like a nice thing to do on the weekend and appreciate a cup of coffee.
That's so good. You're so passionate about it. It's rad. I've always got 3 questions I like to ask at the end of the podcast. You probably know, but I guess for those kids that are out there trying to become a trail builder, or maybe even just try and make it in the mountain bike industry, what advice would you have to those guys that are listening at the moment?
Trail building isn't easy. It's not like what you probably imagine, where you just go and hang out, lean on the rake, and the trail builds itself. It's hard work, and you're working remotely sometimes. You're working when it's stinking hot and freezing cold, and but it's just such a cool feeling to be able to build something or create something and be able to enjoy it. It's not like you're a builder and you build a really nice house for a client. At the end, you hand over the keys and then they get to enjoy it. Like we build a trail, we don't really have to hand over the keys. We actually can just come back and ride it and still enjoy it. So that's probably the coolest thing about it, I think, is just being able to create something that brings so much stoke and happiness. And like, one of the coolest things when I was working down in Derby and even at Mount Buller years ago, you might be working close to an existing trail and you'll be working away, and all of a sudden you can just hear people like hooting and hollering and getting stoked all the way down. And you might randomly just like bump into somebody, and the appreciation they have and just how fired up they are. It's like a really cool thing to see. So it makes all that hard yakka worth it, I think. But if anyone's trying to get into it, like, there is no better time. I just feel like probably every trail building in Australia is looking for staff. There's so much work out there. But yeah, I would just say be prepared to put in the hard work and just don't expect to be handed everything on a platter. You got to take time to learn and work your way up. And I think for myself, I've been an employee for the last 12 years, and now I'm transition to be, the boss of a company, a partner of a company. I'm trying to really focus on looking after the staff and understanding their point of view, and because that was me recently. That was me wanting to have that support, and I just want to try and make it, like, it is such a unique job, and it's so cool to be out doing what we do. I want to make it enjoyable. I don't want to be like a hard ass boss who's yelling. I just want to teach people and pass on the knowledge that I've learned, and hopefully learn from them as well. Like I've learned so much over the years from so many different people. I just want to keep learning and passing on that knowledge.
That's so rad. What kind of motivates you? You mentioned before, like there was times in Tassie where you just didn't want to do anything. You were getting pretty dark on it. But is there anything that, like, is there anything that motivates you to kind of get going, like any music or anything like that?
I think I was talking to Fani, who's created the soil searching program with Specialized, and he asked me, like, what are you, like, how do you explain yourself? And I think it comes down to me being like a bit of a perfectionist. Like I'm always wanting to make sure it's right, or like make it as best as I can. Like I find it hard to settle and think, oh, that'll do, I'll just keep moving on. So I think that's what motivates me to keep going. And when I was in Tassie, I think my mum told me, like, if you're not stoked, or, like, if you're having a rough time, like, don't give up when you're at a low point. Like, push through that, and then when you feel like you've done everything you can, that's a time to move on. And I'm very glad that I did that with World Trail. Like, there were plenty of times over the years where it was hard living away, and I got pretty sick a couple of years ago. I had Ross River virus, and that knocked me out for a few months. Right. So that was another time where I was like, oh, I can't keep doing this. But I'm glad that I pushed on and kept doing that, kept, going forward. And I'm really proud of what I was able to achieve and all the opportunities that I was given at World Trail. I think I just always get motivated to keep trying to be better and stuff like that. And I guess in terms of music and stuff, I'm a bit of a mixed bag. I just listen to a lot of random stuff. One of my best mates, Matty McAlpine, he's got this company called Alpine Group, and he works out of this warehouse up in the
Gypsy Tales Brothers, for those that don't know.
Yeah. And Matty created this epic playlist called Warehouse Beer Tunes, and we always just throw that on if it's like a Friday Arvo or something like that, and just brings good vibes and stuff like that. So
yeah. Sick. I'll have to see if I can find it. Jace to send it to
me. And also I listen to a lot of podcasts. I feel like sitting in an excavator is like the only time that I can listen and sort of work autonomously and focus on what's actually coming into my ears. I try listening to them, when I drive or when I'm on a plane or something, I just feel like I zone out. So I feel like sitting in the digger is the time to listen to podcasts. And
that's sick.
I think the first one I started listening to was Jace. I knew Jace from before he started Gypsy Tales, so it's kind of funny.
Yeah, I think you've been mentioned on there a few times. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. Those guys are such good dudes, and had heaps of good times with them over the years.
Yeah, I've got all the time in the world for Jace. He was a huge help when I was setting this up. So he wouldn't have known me from a bar or soap. He still helped me out. So I've got all the time in the world for him.
Yeah, nice.
This unit, but yeah, good dude. Yeah, thanks so much for coming on, man. Thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule and doing this.
No worries. Yeah, sorry it's taken us a little bit to make it happen, but I'm stoked to have had the invite. Thanks to Phil for doing the intro.
Yeah, Phil. Yeah, that was a while ago. I've almost forgot about that. But yeah, it didn't take long at all. As I said to you, I deal with Baxter and Jai. So this was easy. Thanks so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure to chat with you. And hopefully we'll be able to meet up in person at some point and listen to that playlist.
Yeah, man, for sure. Hopefully there'll be a few more events going on, and we can travel around a bit easier in the near future. But yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's been great to be able to share a bit of my story, and good luck with the training for the Nationals next year. Hopefully you get what you want out of that.
Oh man, I'm so fatigued today. I had to have a coffee before I started this. I was ruined. Yeah. It's going good. It's been fun. It's definitely a thing. Yeah, thank you. I'm gonna try not to die on that track. So
yeah, nice one. I need some I've really been slack since we've had Olivia. I've no time for myself to like do it. I used to do yoga nearly every day, and my time on the bike, it hasn't been as much recently, but I'm sure it'll get better as she gets older, and yeah, I can keep getting out there.
Heck. Easy, man. Well, enjoy the rest of your night. Thanks so much for coming on, and we'll speak again soon.
No worries. Thanks, mate. It was good to chat.
Cheers, man. Bye.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to that one, guys. I hope you got a bit of inspiration out of that one. It was an epic episode. I really love chatting with this guy. One of my heroes when it comes to mountain biking and just pushing the sport, something he loves. So it was really cool to sit down with him. Hopefully I didn't sound too nervous. Anyway, thanks to NS Dynamics, Two Up Bike Co, Taylor Trails, FE Sports, Franked, Dirt Surfer, and Crush for coming on board and helping us out. Without these guys, the podcast won't continue. Don't forget to share this podcast, like on iTunes, give us a review, share it with your nana, share it with your dog, share it with whatever, and let's help this thing grow. Thanks, and we'll see you on the next one. It's going to be huge.